her at the microphone, glowing and pregnant. She stood in front of 300 people, 5 months pregnant, and told them God had given her a miracle. She called him her covering, her answered prayer, the man God sent to heal everything she had lost. Pause. The church celebrated with her. Nathaniel frozen and trembling in the third row. Music cuts. Silence. Narrator drops to almost a whisper. But in the third row, one man was not celebrating. His hands were shaking, his face was wet with sweat, and his eyes were the eyes of a man whose past had just walked into the room. Split shot, her joy and his terror. What she did not know was that the man she was thanking God for was the same man who murdered her parents.
The gunshot rang out before little Adazi could even scream. She was 7 years old, crouched behind the sofa in the corner of their small sitting room, her 4-year-old brother Emeka pressed against her chest, both of them shaking so hard their teeth were clicking together. She had one hand clamped over her brother's mouth, and one eye peeking through the gap between the sofa and the wall. What she saw that night would take up permanent residence in the deepest chambers of her memory, a tenant that would never pay rent and would never leave. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, because right now Adaisi is not 7. She is 29. She is standing at the front of a church in Lagos. Her yellow dress stretched beautifully across a 5-month baby bump, her face glowing with the kind of joy that only survives after it has been through fire. The congregation is packed, 300 people, maybe more, fans spinning overhead. The choir has just finished, and Adaise is holding the microphone like she was born to hold it. "I lost my parents to armed robbers," she says, her voice steady and clear. "I grew up with nothing. I slept hungry. I cried until crying stopped working. But God," she pauses. She smiles. Her eyes fill. "But God sent me a helper. He sent me a covering. He sent me my husband." Applause fills the building. People raise their hands. Someone shouts, "Hallelujah!" And in the third row, a man in a gray suit sits perfectly still in the middle of the celebration. His name is Pastor Nathaniel Obi. He is 41 years old, well-built, with kind eyes that have, over the years, counseled hundreds of people through grief, guilt, and shame. He has buried those eyes in his hands now. His shoulders are shaking. The woman next to him thinks he is crying from joy. She pats his back. She whispers, "God is good, Pastor." He does not respond, because something inside him has just cracked open. Something he buried 22 years ago has just crawled out of its grave, walked across the church floor, and sat down beside him. He is trembling, and he cannot stop.
If you are new here, please subscribe and hit the notification bell, because the stories we tell on this channel will shake something loose in your soul. Now let us go back to the beginning. Engineer Charles Obiora was not a rich man, but he was a proud one, and not in the bad way. He was proud the way a man becomes proud when he has built something from nothing, using only his bare hands and the grace of God. He had studied civil engineering through a combination of scholarships, part-time jobs, and the kind of stubborn refusal to quit that his own father had passed down to him like a family heirloom. He had married his wife, Ngozi, when they both had nothing, and they had laughed about it. "We will build together," he told her on their wedding night. She had believed him completely. By the time Adaise was born, they were still building. Charles was working for a small construction firm that underpaid him, but gave him the experience he needed. They lived in a 2-bedroom flat in Surulere. The rent was always 3 months behind. Ngozi sold small chops from a cooler at the junction to supplement the income. There were mornings when Adaise went to school without lunch money, and Ngozi would squeeze her daughter's face between her palms and say, "When you come back, I will have something for you." She always made sure she did, even if it meant she herself did not eat. They prayed every night as a family. Charles would kneel at the foot of their bed, Ngozi beside him, and the two children sandwiched between their parents like bookmarks. He would pray in a low, earnest voice that carried the weight of a man who genuinely believed someone was listening. "Lord, we are not complaining. We are asking. You know what we need. You know the children need more. Please open a door for us." And then, one Tuesday in October, the door opened. Charles came home with news that made Ngozi drop her wooden spoon right there in the kitchen. A federal government contractor had selected him to oversee a major road construction project in the southwest. The value of the contract was 200 million naira. His personal payment, after the company's cut, was 47 million. It was more money than either of them had ever seen in their combined lifetimes. It was a number that made Charles sit down on the kitchen floor and laugh until he cried, and Ngozi sat down right beside him and joined in. The advance payment came 2 days later. Cash. Because the contractor was old school and did not trust wire transfers for initial disbursements. Charles came home with a black bag that sat on the dining table between them like a quiet miracle. They did not count it in front of the children. They put the children to bed first. Then they sat together at that table and counted every note, slowly, reverently, almost like they were handling something sacred. "We will put it in the bank first thing tomorrow," Charles said. "Tonight we celebrate." Ngozi cooked jollof rice, fried plantain, and chicken. They called the children out of bed and ate together past midnight, laughing and talking about the house they would build, the school they would move Adeze to, the hospital where they would have the third child Ngozi had been quietly hoping for. It was the happiest night of Adeze's childhood. She would spend the rest of her life trying to hold on to the exact texture of it. They never made it to the bank. At 2:30 in the morning, while Charles and Ngozi slept and the children had finally drifted off, 3 men climbed over the back fence. They had been watching the flat for 2 days. They had a source, someone who had seen or heard something, someone who had talked where they should not have. They came through the kitchen window with crowbars and one gun between them, and they moved through the flat with the practiced quiet of men who had done this before. Charles heard them first. He reached for his phone on the bedside table and knocked it to the floor. The sound was enough. The bedroom door burst open. Torchlight hit his face. "Nobody move," the one with the gun said. His name, though Charles would never know it, was Nathaniel. He was 19 years old, thin as a wire, running with a crew because hunger had walked him to a door he should never have knocked on. He was trembling too. That part does not excuse him. But it is true. They dragged Charles and Ngozi to the sitting room. Adeze and Emeka heard the noise and crept to the doorway. Adeze pulled her brother behind the sofa before anyone saw them. "Where is the money?" the one called Nathaniel demanded. "There is no money," Charles said. His voice was controlled, but his hands, Adeze could see his hands, they were shaking. "I am just a working man. Please, my children are in the house." "We know about the bag," Nathaniel said. "Bring it out and nothing will happen to your family." "There is no bag," Charles said again. And that was when Adeze, 7 years old and trying to be helpful in the way that only children can be dangerously, helpfully naive, piped up from behind the sofa in a small, frightened voice. "Daddy, what about the money in the bag?" The room went absolutely silent. Charles closed his eyes. Ngozi made a sound that was not quite a word, and Nathaniel turned toward the sofa where the children were crouching, then turned back to Charles, and something shifted in the air between them. Not because of the child's words alone, but because the lie had been broken. Because now there was shame and anger, and the terrifying logic of desperate men in a dark room who felt they had been played. "You lied to us," Nathaniel said, and it happened very fast after that. Her daze pressed her brother's face into her chest and squeezed her own eyes shut. She heard 2 shots. She heard her mother scream once, a short, severed sound, and then nothing. She heard the men running. She heard the back door. She heard silence. She stayed behind that sofa for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. She did not know. Emeka was shaking so hard she could feel his heartbeat against her ribs. When she finally made herself look, she saw her father on the floor and her mother beside him. And she understood. The way children sometimes understand terrible things all at once, that they were gone. She had seen Nathaniel's face for only a second in the torchlight before she closed her eyes. Just a second. A young face. Scared. Thin. She was 7. By the time she was 8, the details had blurred. By the time she was 10, it was more of a feeling than a memory. What she never forgot was the silence after the shots. If this story is already gripping you, drop a comment below and let us know what you are thinking. Your engagement keeps this channel going. The relatives came, and they were kind for about 3 weeks. Then the kindness ran out the way kindness sometimes does when it meets the sustained inconvenience of 2 traumatized orphans. Adaeze was sent to her father's aunt in Onitsha, a strict woman with a small house and a smaller heart. Emeka was taken by a different uncle in Port Harcourt. They cried at the separation. They promised to find each other. They were children. They had no power over anything. Adaeze grew up learning to take up as little space as possible. She washed plates, swept floors, ran errands, and studied at night by whatever light was available. She was bright. Her teachers always said so. But bright does not pay school fees. She finished secondary school through sheer determination and a few kind teachers who intervened at critical moments. By 20, she was in Lagos, selling fabric at Balogun Market, sleeping in a room she shared with 5 other girls, sending small amounts of money to wherever Emeka was, which changed often because he too had a difficult road. She prayed the way her father had taught her, kneeling, earnest, specific. Lord, I am not complaining. I am asking. Meanwhile, in a different part of Lagos, a man named Nathaniel Obi was dismantling himself from the inside out. He had not slept properly since that night. The first few weeks he told himself it was just nerves. Then the months passed, and the nightmares started. He would wake up at 3 in the morning, drenched in sweat, seeing the man fall, hearing the woman scream. He started drinking to kill the dreams. The drinking made everything worse. His crew scattered. His life contracted. By 23, he was a hollow version of a person, surviving on the outside and rotting on the inside. He walked into a Pentecostal church on a Wednesday evening because he was sheltering from rain and too tired to walk any further. The pastor was preaching about mercy. Nathaniel sat in the back row in wet clothes and listened with the desperate attention of a man hearing the voice of someone who might be able to save him. He went back on Sunday, and the Sunday after that, and one night he went to the altar and he put down everything he had been carrying, and something happened to him in that moment that he could not have explained to anyone who had not experienced it themselves. He did not forget what he had done. He just found a way to keep living with it. He devoted himself to the church. He fasted. He studied, he counseled, he gave, he built a reputation, slowly, genuinely, as a man of integrity. By 30, he was ordained. By 35, he had his own congregation in Lagos. He carried the guilt like a stone in his chest, quiet and heavy and permanent, and he had made a private agreement with God that he would spend the rest of his life paying back into the world what he had taken from it. He never expected that what he had taken would one day walk into his church wearing a yellow dress. He saw a day's first at an outreach his church organized in the Mushin area, where she was volunteering with a women's group. He noticed her the way you notice a person who seems to be working slightly harder than everyone around them. He asked about her. He was told she was a fabric trader, a serious Christian, no family to speak of. He introduced himself. She recognized him as a pastor and was respectful, but not impressed, the way a woman who has survived on her own for years is often not easily impressed. He helped her. It started small. He connected her to a church member who needed a reliable fabric supplier for her fashion business. That connection tripled Adiz's income within 6 months. He gave without strings. He checked in without pressure. He prayed for her publicly at church services, mentioning her business by name, which brought her more customers. Over 18 months, the helping became friendship, and the friendship became something quieter and more significant. And one evening over rice and stew at a small restaurant in Yaba, he told her that he had feelings for her. Adiz looked at this man, this stable, gentle, God-fearing man who had asked for nothing and given consistently, and she thought about her father on that floor and her mother beside him, and the 22 years of surviving alone. She thought about the prayers she had prayed since she was 7. She said, "Give me time to pray about it." He said, "Take all the time you need." 6 months later, she said yes. They married quietly. Small wedding, people from the church. She wore white. He cried through the entire ceremony in a way that people in the congregation called beautiful. And it was. It just was not the kind of beautiful they thought it was. When she became pregnant, Adizi felt something settle in her that had never been settled before. She started sleeping deeply for the first time in her adult life. She started laughing easily. She gave the testimony in church because her heart was so full it needed somewhere to overflow. "He became my covering," she said, 5 months pregnant, glowing under the church lights. "God turned my mourning into dancing." And in the 3rd row, her husband was being undone. He had not connected the details during their courtship. She had told him she lost her parents to armed robbers when she was young. Dozens of people had that story in Lagos. It was a tragedy that multiplied across a generation. He had grieved with her about it, the way a pastor grieves with people about loss. He had not let himself know. Perhaps he had protected himself from knowing. But now she was describing the night, the sitting room, the 2 children hiding, the little girl who said the wrong thing, the shots, the silence, and the details were assembling themselves into a shape he recognized because he had been inside that shape. He had been the one holding the torch. He had been the 19-year-old with the gun. He had been the one who heard the lie broken and made the irreversible choice. He sat in the 3rd row and he understood, completely and finally, that God had not just given him a wife. God had given him the daughter of the people he had killed, and he was going to have to decide what to do with that. That night, after the church emptied and the last member had greeted them and they were home in their bedroom, Adiz was sitting at the dressing table, rubbing shea butter on her stomach and humming quietly. Nathaniel stood in the doorway and watched her for a long moment. Then he said her name. She looked up at his reflection in the mirror. She registered his face. "What is wrong with you?" she asked. "You have been strange since service." He came and sat on the edge of the bed. He folded his hands. He was quiet for what felt like a very long time. Then he said, "Adeze, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond." She put down the shea butter. She turned to face him fully. "You are scaring me." "I was 19, he said. "I was desperate and stupid and running with people I should have run away from. I did not plan for anyone to get hurt. I want you to know that, not as an excuse, but because it is true. We went for the money. That was all we wanted." His voice was completely flat. He was not crying. He was beyond crying. "Adeze, the night your parents were killed, I was there. I was the one holding the gun. I am the one who shot them." The room became a different kind of silent. Adeze did not scream. She did not throw anything. She sat very still, and her hand moved slowly to her stomach and rested there, over the child, and her face did something complicated and terrible that Nathaniel would never be able to describe afterward. She stood up. She walked to the window. She stood there with her back to him for a long time. "You have known this," she finally said, "since my testimony. I connected it tonight. I swear to you, I swear, I did not know when we met. I did not know when we married. But you knew something," she said. "Somewhere in you, you knew something." She turned around, and her eyes were dry, and that was somehow worse than tears would have been. "You prayed for me from that pulpit. You laid hands on me. You stood at that altar and made vows to me, and my parents were already in the ground because of you. God has forgiven me," he said, and he meant it. He believed it completely. "I have spent 22 years trying to—" "I am not God," she said. Her voice did not rise. It just cut, clean and final as a blade. She went to the guest room that night, and the next, and the next. She did not speak to him except in the necessary language of two people living in the same building. She watched him move around the house, and she kept touching her stomach, as if checking that the child was still there, as if trying to separate the two things that were now impossibly tangled together. She thought about her father's hands. She thought about her mother's voice, the last sound she ever made. She thought about the 7-year-old girl behind the sofa who had said the wrong thing. She thought about Emeka, wherever he was now, who had grown up without their parents because of this man who had slept beside her, who had prayed over her, who had fathered her child. On the 9th day, she put on her shoes and walked to the police station. Nathaniel did not resist. When the officers came, he was sitting in the sitting room as if he had been waiting. He stood up and he walked out with them, and he did not look back at the house. In court, he confessed to everything with the same flat, complete honesty with which he had confessed to Adeze. His lawyer advised him to fight it. He dismissed his lawyer. The judge, visibly shaken, sentenced him to life imprisonment. On the day of sentencing, Adeze stood outside the courthouse in the November heat, 5 months pregnant, alone. The door behind her was still swinging from the last person who had walked out. Somewhere inside that building, the man who killed her parents, the man who married her, the father of her unborn child, was being taken away in handcuffs. She put her hand on her stomach. She stood in the sun, and she did not know yet whether what she had done was right or whether it had simply been necessary, and she understood now that those two things were not always the same. She had not forgiven him. She did not know if she ever would. She did not know what she would tell the child. She did not know what kind of mother she would be, or what kind of woman she would become on the other side of this. She only knew that she had chosen to let the truth be true, out loud, in public, with consequences. She only knew she could not have done otherwise. She only knew she was still standing. Now here is the question this story leaves behind, and we want you to sit with it genuinely. She chose justice. She carried the grief and the pregnancy and the impossible weight of what had been done to her family, and she walked into that police station. Was she right? Does a man's transformation cancel what he took? Does forgiveness mean silence? Does love survive the discovery of something like this, or does it die immediately and completely? Drop your answer in the comments right now. Tell us what you would have done. Tell us where you would have broken. Tell us whether you think she made the right choice. This comment section is about to say something, and we want to hear from you. If this story moved you, please like this video, because it helps more people find it. Share it with someone who needs to think about the difference between forgiveness and consequence. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, now is the time, because we tell the kinds of stories here that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. She stood in the sun outside that courthouse, one hand on her stomach, and she breathed. That was all she could do. She breathed, and she remained, and the child inside her moved, and she kept standing. What would you have done